Good afternoon and welcome to Covfeed Investigates. I'm your host, Joseph Cooney, and today we're taking a deep dive into issues from legal aid to child vaccine hesitancy in Coventry. But first, we have Katie Light here with us to tell us how controversial British social media figures shape the public's opinion. So Katie, could you elaborate on this for us?
Of course. So since the inception of the internet, public figures have been making contentious comments that have sparked criticism online. Throughout the years, however, the amount of controversial clips and comments have grown across social media sites. In 2010, Paul Chambers tweeted a joke about blowing up an airport, leading to a conviction under the UK's Terrorism Act. The case sparked debate about free speech and was eventually quashed. In 2012, Azhar Ahmed faced legal action for a Facebook post about soldiers, highlighting tensions between free expression and respect for the military. That same year, Diane Abbott's divide and rule comment on Twitter drew criticism for perceived racial insensitivity. In 2013, Katie Hopkins sparked outrage by comparing Scottish life expectancy to that of the Third World. Later in 2015, she referred to migrants as cockroaches in a column, drawing parallels to genocidal language. Also in 2015, Carl Benjamin's "I wouldn't even rape you" tweet about a Labour MP led to widespread condemnation. In 2017, Scottish politician John Mason's "girls don't always say yes first time" tweet was labelled sexist. And that same year, Boris Johnson's letterbox remark about Muslim women wearing burqas caused significant offence. And finally, Jacob Rees-Mogg's 2018 comment about the Grenfell fire being a failure of state drew sharp criticism. These incidents underscore the complexities of public discourse and the fine line between free speech and offence. Dr. Marcus Maloney, sociology lecturer at Coventry University, spoke about anti-woke culture across the Midlands.
If you go to your average pub in the East Midlands and you talk to most kind of normie, sort of 30 to 40-year-old adults in those pubs, you'll find plenty of people who are sort of anti-woke, and they'll talk about, the BBC shows, they're pushing this agenda down my throat and so on. So we need to be careful about the idea that some of these quite conservative or reactionary views are actually quite mainstream. And, when you leave the kind of confines of the university, the views that are held by kind of your average British person can be quite sort of different to the views that are held by us sort of progressives in universities.
Given the current political state, it is difficult to see if hate speech online is likely to decline.
Well, thanks for that, Katie. Now, a growing scepticism around vaccines has been linked to outbreaks of illness, such as measles, across the UK. Here's Corey Wilkinson to explain more. So, Corey.
Thanks, Joe. Over recent years, the rate of children being vaccinated has decreased across England, with no vaccines meeting the 95% coverage target set by the government since 2021. The MMR vaccine in particular has reached its lowest level of coverage since 2010, prompting a concerning rise in measles cases across the country. Most measles cases in 2024 were reported in London and the West Midlands, the regions with the lowest overall vaccination rate in the country. The rate of vaccination varies across the country, with lower income areas more greatly impacted by the declining rates. Here in Coventry, only 85% of children on average have received each recommended vaccine by their 5th birthday, below the national average of an 88% uptake rate. We spoke to local GP, Dr. Helen Tyrrell, about the barriers she sees to reaching that 95% target and why it is so important that we do.
I think misinformation, probably not being fully informed or being able to process that and understand all the information we give. Lots of it can be quite difficult. And if people aren't from low social economic backgrounds, if people can't really understand what we're telling them fully about why you'd have it and understand kind of that sort of thing.
The diseases that the UK recommends vaccines for, while rare, can be incredibly dangerous, particularly in children and people who are immunocompromised, who are more vulnerable to their worst effects.
There are also some people that think, well, if everyone else is vaccinated, I don't need to be vaccinated for herd immunity. But that absolutely is stopped now. We are under 95%, so that doesn't count. So when anyone tells me that, I tell them it's rubbish because they will get ill. And I think people just don't think it will happen to them because they're such rare diseases. But actually, I mean, if you get some of these, children can die and do die, and they're left with long-term disabilities.
2024 had 2,911 laboratory-confirmed measles cases, a shocking number for the disease that was considered eradicated in the UK in 2017. Back to you, Joe.
Now, we're here with Frankie Fajardo to tell us about the struggles of accessing legal aid. So, Frankie, what have you found?
Well, Joe, ordinary people are unable to go through the legal channels to access justice and resolution they need to move forward with their lives. Charities like Advocate, who provide free legal representation, are urging barristers to take on 25 hours a year of pro bono work so that at least some of the most in need are able to have partial representation throughout the case. For many, this can mean having a barrister represent you, but not having a solicitor or vice versa. But for most people, easy access to quality legal information is out of budget and just out of reach. A poll by the Law Society found that 2/3 of lawyers admitted to thinking that the last 10 years has worsened access of citizens to justice, and they find themselves in need of without representation. So in the last 10 years, those represented by an advocate within magistrates' courts has seen a drop of 41%. This means people are left unadvised and without a full picture of their legal rights, creating greater inequality. At its inception in 1949, legal aid covered 80% of people, and it operated on a sliding scale depending on how rich or poor you were, whereas now that's not the case. Entitlement to legal aid is now based on how much disposable income people have. However, it doesn't consider things like childcare or bills or other outgoings that a person might have. So in reality, the system is completely defunct.
I see. Well, thank you very much for that information. Next, we look into knife crime charities in Coventry and the new and latest developments of them. So, Ejmin, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Joe. Knife crime is one of the biggest issues amongst young people in Coventry and the West Midlands. Organisations such as Knife Crime Awareness and Activating Creative Talent have made it their mission to provide creative ways to support young people. Funding continues to be a challenge with such initiatives, and there is a demand on more funding to help push these projects further. So let's hear from Teswell White, CEO of Activating Creative Talents, who enlightens us more about this.
That roughly costs around about £50,000 to prevent young people from entering the criminal justice system in the first place. And at the moment, they're spending about £200,000 for a 16-year-old to actually enter the criminal justice system. So we're spending much more money in a criminal justice system than actually just taking the money from that side, pulling it at the front end, and which just prevent it in the beginning, to begin with it in the first place.
Statistics show that in Coventry, there were 385 recorded crimes of carrying a knife in the year ending March 2024, compared with 458 in 2023. Research shows inequalities such as poverty, violence in the household, and parents who are addicted to drugs or alcohol are more likely to draw the child or young person into a violent lifestyle. So with the continued efforts and support from these knife crime organisations, we expect greater improvements and a continued reduction in crime rates.
Thank you very much for that, Ejmin. Sadly, that's all from us. Be sure to check the Covfeed website for a more in-depth look at some of these stories. I've been your host, Joseph Cooney. Thanks for watching and goodbye.